All right. So you need a problem. How do you find the problem? You find the problem by observing. I give you the example of the hearing aid, right? The gentleman didn't have to tell me that he has a problem fixing that battery. You're observing that he or she has a problem replacing that battery. So again, in the design competition that we have people, students, teams will go to the senior centers and they will just observe, they'll interact, and that's how they're supposed to come up with the ideas. There's actually a process that, I didn't have a chart on it, but it says you observe, you create a mock-up, build a prototype. It doesn't have to be a real prototype, it's got to be a mock-up. You test it with the seniors. So in that hearing aid example, what you would do is, first off, you would validate, oh, that's a real problem for you, right? Would you really like a solution if we were to get you something that, oh yeah, that would be great. So then what you do is you create a mock-up that has a little slider in it with a battery, and all he can do is put his hearing aid in there and slide the battery in there. It's a mock-up, right, without really having it to work. And the individual says, oh yeah, that would be neat. Then somehow you got to figure out, you don't ask them how much you're willing to pay, but you kind of have an idea. So is this something that, you know, if it costs you a few dollars, would that be okay? And then he says, yeah, you know, I'll pay $5 for it. Okay, so now you know your guidelines. Now you go figure out if you can actually make the solution. Now you do the next level prototype, and that's how you do your product development into something that makes sense. Now you got to figure out how much it's going to cost you, how many of those you're going to sell, so that's the market research, all of those things. But it all started off with the basic problem. You observed the problem, you created a potential solution, you tested it, you iterated it. It's called pivoting the idea. No company that I know of has started saying, I'm going to build this product and end up shipping that product in the end. They always, always, always go to something that's different. To do it before you invest a whole lot of resource makes you a successful candidate. So this is a totally different way of doing business than doing it the old way. So you have a desire, you have an idea, you got your company, you got a problem. Then what do you need? Anybody guess? You need a customer. Of course, your idea has to be matched to the problem. You got to have a customer. And what does a customer have to do? The customer has to be willing to pay you dollars. And how much are they willing to pay you? Is more than enough for you to make revenue and profit. So before you do that, you've got to be able to formulate what the customer is going to get. What I find with engineers is we're the absolute worst in defining what is it that you would really get as a customer. You would start defining, oh, I'm going to have this greatest hearing aid device, blah, 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 but not telling the customer, oh, so you'll have a little jig that you can put your hearing aid and you're going to ship that in there. Very simple concept, but we are, just observe yourself, right? I've seen enough students go through that we're very poor at, so what is it that I'm, as a customer, really am going to get? Not obvious. And so the process that we go through in our class is to go through this cycle over and over again. So you got to have a problem, you got to define, this was an example of a team called Digibag, right? So these are computer science majors. They came in and said, well, we want to do an app. And I said, okay, what's your app going to do? Well, it's going to track the all the devices in my backpack. Well, who's going to download that? Whose problem is it? Well, you know, it's my problem too, so okay. How many times have you paid for an app? Anybody paid for an app? Maybe 99 cents? How are you going to make money? You got a good idea because it is a problem. I lose stuff. I leave my power charger behind. So it is addressing a good problem, but an app by itself is not a good solution. So where we pivoted them to was they created, I used to call it a gizmo, right? It's a little device that they would put in the backpack, and it would communicate with RFID tags on each of the device that you want to track. And then that goes into the app. So what you're selling is this device that could be sold for $10, $20, whatever the number. That's how you make money. You don't make money with the app. Okay, subtle difference. Now, so the other thing you got to know is who's the customer. So let's say you're going to sell this gizmo. It's going to go in the backpack. Are you going to provide that backpack to the customer? Or are you going to provide the gizmo? Two different markets. Same gizmo you can sell on Amazon or Baidu or whoever, right? Or Alibaba, right? Customer then is one that already has a backpack and is buying this unit and putting it in the device, and you're buying the RFID tag. So you can sell a kit, and that's perfectly okay. That could be one scenario. Could you also, so let's say, a simple example, let's say you make $10 for that revenue, and it costs you $2 to make, so that seems like a reasonable model. What if you were to put that gizmo in a backpack and sell the backpack? Will a customer pay, instead of $50, maybe $60? That doesn't make a lot of sense, because if it is $10 extra that you get as a revenue, well, you're getting $10 on a standalone part. Now to integrate that into a backpack, you got to do something else. You got to build a backpack or buy the backpack, put it in there. You got to look at the business scenario. What is your cost? What is the revenue that you're going to get? Then people said, well, I could actually make the backpack. You could, but making the backpack is a totally different skill set, right? You need people that are sewers that are making backpack. Do you really want to get in that business? You can go to Shenzhen and you can buy lots of backpacks for $10. So there could be a scenario where you could buy the backpack from Alibaba, have an integration capability in the United States, let's say, and sell that whole thing. And now if you make $20 incremental revenue and it costs you $5 to make, that makes business sense. So the reason I'm walking you through these examples is to make sure that just by saying that I'm going to build this gizmo is not sufficient. You have to go through the different scenarios and figure out what makes sense for you. Any questions on that? So the technical part of this was the design of that gizmo, getting the RFID tag. The rest of it is not really super technical circuit design, but it's creating a business. So you have to match your desire. If you want to be a player in that, if you want to be the CEO of a company that sells that digibag, and you're good with that, then go for it. And it makes business sense, then go for it. If it's something that you would rather sit in the corner and do simulations on A to D converters, this is not for you, right? So very personal decision that you have to make. Do you want to do a startup like that? Do you want to make money? What's the end goal? Because remember, not every startup is successful. And if you don't have that passion, startups are not easy. There's all kinds of problems that you get into. We kind of glossed over, in the scenario where you're buying the backpack and integrating the solution. It's a whole totally different skill set to negotiate pricing, to do shipping and receiving, to delivering the parts. Some people just don't like that. And if you're one of those, don't start this business. If you want to be the owner of that business that's shipping that product, by all means, right? So, any questions on that? And by the way, how do you decide whether to launch this? I mean, I'm just showing you a scenario that it fits, right? But you got to do your due diligence with the customer to make sure the customers will buy it, that they value it at the right prices. I just use $10, right? Maybe it's $30. I don't know what the number is. But by the way, you can also take your gizmo and you can license it to Samsonite or whoever, Jansport, whoever the manufacturer of the backpack is, and you can sell it to them, and they integrate it. So again, lots of different scenarios. You've got to decide what's the right way for you to make that business work. Because in the end, you got to make money. Top line, bottom line. Top line is the revenue that you make in. You have $10 per gizmo that you're selling on Amazon, and you sell 100,000 of those, that's $1 million, right? And if it costs you $200,000 and that is your profit, that's not a bad business. I'd love to do that. All right, so anyway, that's a cartoon that I require my students to etch in their brain, right? We talk about it in the first class, and we just keep pumping it through the entire process. Because what they have to do is they got to come up with the idea as a team. They got to identify what the problem they're solving, who the customer is, do the market research, and kind of simulate it. So we don't require them to build anything in the 10 weeks. It's just not enough time. I want them to focus on all of the other things. Ideally, if I had my way, I would do a follow-up course where they actually take the ideas and actually build a real product. Anyway, very popular class in the U.S. The other qualification on this is I keep focusing on the problem that you're solving. But if you come back, you can argue with me that Facebook wasn't really solving a problem. It was enhancing a feature. And that's okay, right? Because I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg knew right at the beginning whether he would be successful and to what extent. But he certainly was able to do that, right? So I can't argue that success. So a checklist that I use is, it all actually starts with a team. You got to have the idea, you got to have a team, because no one person can do everything themselves. And so just be careful. The one thing that I was telling one of the HKUST group at break is that just be careful that you don't create a team just because your buddies in college and your dorm mates. Because if you look at the detailed financials, if you're the sole owner of a company, you own 100%, right? If you take on one partner, that's your share likely will go to 50%. You have 3 people, it's 33%. That's at the beginning, right? And then as you start to take on more investments, the investors will take chunks of your company. And so I walk you through a scenario that says very quickly you could get down to 10% or less of the company. And you're devoting your 24/7 effort into making that company successful. That's not really fair, right? So I think one way to do this is that if it's really your idea, your company, you incorporate it, keep ownership 100%, give out chunks as they're appropriate. I don't want you to cheat people. If truly it's your partner's idea and you're putting that to build that gizmo, it's your partner that really built it, you're the marketing person or the CEO, be fair to them, right? But just keep that in mind. It's not just something because it's your roommate that did it, you're going to give them half the company, right? Just be cautious of that. So that's the team part. You got to have a business plan, which includes, what's your revenue going to be, what's your profit going to be, how much you're going to make this year, next year, year after, at least a 3-year plan. And you got to be able to define specifications that make sense, the customer wants. Oh, differentiation, we didn't talk about that. So what will keep somebody else from copying your idea? And how are you the only one that can supply that part? If you really want to get to it, I think you've got to have, oh, did I skip on that? I used to have a couple of charts that basically say you got to have what I call a must-have product. Customer says, I got to have this, and nobody else can provide it, right? So in the hearing aid solution, you're the only one that can provide that hearing aid. That's a differentiated solution, right? And it meets the pricing that you're looking for. So make sure it's differentiated, understand your competition, because if it's something good and if it's worth copying, expect that there'll be competition, right? Somebody is going to copy it and undersell you. So anticipate that. You'll be much better off than being blindsided. Okay? Get to the must-have. You got to have some kind of patent protection if it makes sense. And you got to establish your credibility. We talked about that. You got to have a customer. And then if you have all of those things, then the blue part is really the execution to make sure you deliver what you said you're going to do on schedule, right? So very simple-minded picture. Sorry about the formatting. I think we changed this morning trying to get the 16.9 format, and that kind of screwed up some of the limitations. Okay, so this is what you're trying to get to is a must-have product, which has a product that's differentiated, and you got to worry about planning and execution. So very simple few slides that talk about framework for how to do a startup and what to do about your startup. In words, here's what this checklist looks like. Is you got an idea, whether it's an IP block or circuit design, whatever. You got to figure out who the customer is going to be. Who's the competition? How will you keep from competition to copy your idea? Who's your team? How will you deliver it? And does it make business sense? So startups are not easy, but they can be a lot of fun too, right? Especially if you got that passion. And by the way, a good entrepreneur is always looking for ideas. Once you get launched, you got to make it successful and go on to your next idea. The good news is there's lots and lots and lots of information available online and through classes. The problem is that it's hard for anybody to figure out what's good and what's not so good. And that's kind of the value that we add in our communication. Okay, career development, probably been waiting for this, is, with all the things, exciting things happening in the industry, where are the engineers going to come from? Professor Wei was telling me yesterday that you got to triple the number of engineers in the semiconductor space in China over the next few years. Where are they going to come from? They're going to come from universities. It's going to be people like yourselves. And so if you keep that kind of information in mind, what can you do is what I want to address next here. You got to be creative and innovative. You got to be good at what you do. Right? No matter what you're doing, be good at what you're doing, and stay customer focused. So even if you're a circuit designer, analog circuit designer, digital circuit designer, whatever, always be thinking about who is going to be your customer, who's using it. Now, if you're within a company, if you're working at Intel, the customer's not paying you, but you're getting rewarded in terms of their recognition of what you're doing. So get that mentality in your mind. It really will be helpful to you long term. Whether you stay at Intel or a big company or do your own startup, that'll prepare you for your startup. I think that's a very important aspect to be thinking about. Always be thinking like an entrepreneur. Again, even if you're at MediaTek, Intel, whoever, big company, right? be thinking about what problem is this solving? Even if you're a small piece, if you're doing an IP block, analog IP block, who's going to use it? What are they looking for that's on their wish list? Somebody gave you a spec and you just blindly do the spec, which is okay. You got to do that to earn your paycheck. But ask the broader questions so that you understand how this fits into the bigger scheme of things. And again, that gets you a practice for maybe in the future if you were doing your own business. Be a team player. Typically in the United States, certainly what happens is if you're an entry-level engineer in a big company, you get hired because of your grades maybe, and what the hiring manager feels, how your interview is, how they feel that you can contribute. If you're good at what you're doing, you're meeting your commitments, you're delivering what they asked you to do, you're asking the right questions, following up on discipline, doing more than what you're asked to do, those are some of the features that managers like, right? Because in the end, in a big company, the manager is only as successful as their employees. So if you are working to make your manager successful, presumably if you got a good manager, that'll help you succeed also. And that's a mentality that, you know, if you carry that through when you start your own company and you start to hire people, that's going to help you in the long term. Again, in the United States, what happens is, so if you're that person as I'm describing it, you'll take on more responsibility. Within a year or 2 years, you may have 2 or 3 people that you're managing, being a leader for, because they know, they trust you, you're delivering and you're making your commitments. That's important, right? And so you take on more responsibility. You go on a few more years, maybe you'll get to be a manager. Now, you can then decide if you really don't want to be a manager, be technical. So in the U.S., there's 2 paths, right? You get into a technical path or a management path. And sometimes you can go back and forth depending on the company, but those are all opportunities that I think that you need to evaluate for yourselves. Multidisciplinary, I think, is extremely important. All the things that we talked about, you know, it's not just about circuit design, it's not just about packaging or the process, it's a combination of the things. And it's not just about EE, it's about biomedical, it's about biology, medicine, all kinds of things. I think that's where the leverage is going to come in. Because in the world, it's easier to find people that might be biologists, process engineers, design engineers, but very hard to find somebody that cuts across many boundaries. I'll tell you one of the apps that came up as a solution that I'm still pursuing as a possible startup is to solve the problem of seniors getting isolated. All right, senior people, they lose contact with their kids and their grandkids, and they feel very lonely. I don't know how often you talk to your grandparents, but you're probably busy doing your stuff and don't have the time. Maybe you see their grandparents once in a while, but they're feeling isolated. So this app would be one that we are creating that helps ask the right kinds of questions to help seed the thoughts process in the grandparents so they can record information of their experiences when they were younger and share with the rest of the family. It's kind of a family app. So it's an example of where you're solving a real problem, I think, and the reason I brought it up is that actually came up from an individual that was a cognitive science student. It was their idea, and it's been validated by seniors that I've talked to. So, you know, that's kind of that process that I would suggest going through. Multidisciplinary, I think, is a lot of value added. I think I sort of talked about that. Humanitarian, environment, education, all that stuff. I'll bring this chart up again. We talked about it earlier in terms of if you list all the different disciplines, these may change. You may want to call this process, devices, gates, packaging, blah, 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 right? Try to go up the value chain and be as broad as you can. That's what I would do, and be the tall, thin designer, according to Carlos Icahn and Carver Mead, right? So to give you a further example of, in the design of A6 or A9, A10, whatever, there are many, many disciplines that go towards making that a successful product. In the semiconductor space, for instance, right? So there's design, there's process, packaging, test, quality, reliability, cost, software. As designers, you probably only think about digital or analog or RF or VLSI or microwave, whatever, right? Just kind of representative to show you an example of how there are a lot of other things that you could be worrying about. There's one dimension here where you have electrical, thermal, and mechanical. I gave you examples about the power dissipation in the smartphone, right, and how challenging that is. Design of a package has electrical, mechanical, thermal, all considerations that have to be taken care of. Somebody has to do them, right? You as an electrical designer may not do it. You may have to hire a mechanical engineer, but that's one set of dimensions. In the process area, for instance, there's lithography, there's etch, there's implant, diffusion, interconnect, deposition, blah, 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 right? And within lithography, there's the photoresist, the mask, the alignment, the clean, inspection, blah, 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 all kinds of things, right? So you can figure out where you fit in here, but like I mentioned, my career started off here in an implant, and I didn't even list devices in here, but